The Baltimore Ravens have done it. They have finally addressed their pass rush. We talk about who the Ravens signed, what it means for the team, as well as if the Ravens are done. All that and more coming up on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here on this little Thursday afternoon edition of the show, Thursday evening, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Thank you out there to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners. If you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. We have 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage, and we have it in so many different forms over here on Locked On Ravens. We're going to dive into the Ravens making a signing. They finally addressed their pass rush, and it was an accomplished veteran who they brought into the building. We'll dive into the move and what it means for the Ravens, as well as if the Ravens are done, and if this changes anything when it comes to Baltimore's trade deadline approach. So, the Ravens have been kind of searching and scrambling for answers. We knew the Ravens probably had to do something like this, and I was getting a little worried they weren't going to, based off of how late in the week it was. So we'll dive into all of that as well. Again, thank you for being here today with us. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is presented by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, well, Carl Lawson is the move. The Ravens had him in for a workout earlier in the week, and they end up bringing him in. They are signing him to their practice squad. So I'm not sure, at least at the time of this recording, I'm currently trying to scour along the internet to see if we have an official move made by the Ravens, to see if they have to release anybody from their practice squad. But there are probably going to be a decent amount of moving parts here. Now, hopefully this goes better than the last bigger name veteran practice squad signing the Ravens had in CJ Gardner-Johnson. But it's interesting because Jordan Schultz, who ended up reporting this, he mentioned something really key and really interesting before we get into Carl Lawson, who he is as a pass rusher, etc. So Jordan Schultz reported the Ravens are signing Carl Lawson after having him for a workout. He notched 5 sacks last season with the Cowboys, which we'll get to, and has been waiting for the right opportunity. And I see there's a conversation, I think, around a lot of veteran players not signing with the team before the season starts or for training camps, and not getting that head start. For a lot of these veteran players who are kind of the quote unquote odd ones out when you get to, July, August, if you're signing with a team, when a team has a full 90-man roster, there's not a clear path a lot of those times for playing time. Maybe it's for a depth spot, maybe it's for other things, but if you sign on with a team and, you're their fourth, let's just, use Carl Lawson as an example, 4th or 5th outside linebacker, injuries happen. It's football. It's unfortunate, but they do. Opportunities open up throughout the season, which is why we see guys either wait a couple of weeks. In this case, for Carl Lawson, it was a couple of months. And the Ravens, they have a huge opportunity for Carl Lawson or a veteran pass rusher to go in there and perform. So, I mean, look, is this the big name pass rusher that the Ravens need to win the Super Bowl? I wouldn't go that far. I think it's a start, though. It's a start. A little bit about Carl Lawson. He's a veteran in this league. He is 30 and a half years old. He was actually drafted by the Bengals back in 2017 in the 4th round and established himself as a member of the Bengals. He ended up having 8.5 sacks as a rookie. Then he ended up dealing with some injuries in his second season, only had 1 sack in 7 games, and then put together back-to-back 5 and then 5.5 sack seasons. And the Bengals, there was a conversation at that point, heading into the 2022 or 2021 season, about whether the Bengals should re-sign Carl Lawson or not. Now, they ended up going with Trey Hendrickson, which was a much better decision for them because Carl Lawson, he didn't play in 2021. And then in 2022, he had 7 sacks in 17 games, played a full season, which was great. And then 2023, he played in 6 games, was dealing with stuff, and he didn't have a single sack there. Then 2024 comes along. He signs with Dallas. He signed a big money deal with the Jets. Actually, I'm going to look up how big that deal was because there was that conversation between the Hendrickson and Lawson signings. Lawson's deal with the Jets was 3 years, $45 million. And then he signed with Dallas just on a 1 year, $1 million deal, a prove it deal. And as I mentioned, he had the 5 sacks last season. Now, the thing about Carl Lawson, which I think is really intriguing, is, he's 6'2", 260. And for him, he's someone that can win on his own, right? The Ravens, they're a team, and there was actually a stat here that was put out by, I believe this is a Cowboys account, who obviously covered Carl Lawson last season. He said Baltimore has a 7% stunt rate, partly because it's such a gap discipline scheme, so they don't help their pass rushers. Now, Carl Lawson, he can win without that help. And the guy said that it was so needed for the Ravens, and his cross chop was one of the better ones in the league. So you can just line him up across from a guy and say, go win. And he doesn't need help from a stunt or, a twist or whatever it may be. He can just go out there and play football, essentially, is what Carl Lawson can do. So again, this isn't a move that I expect to propel the Ravens into Super Bowl contention. I think it's kind of like the conversation we had about Odell Beckham Jr. last season, or 2 years ago, and Nelson Aguilar, where they signed Nelson Aguilar and everyone was like, okay, great. They're just doing their thing again, cheap veteran, et cetera, et cetera. And I said at that time on this show, I said, look, it can be a move, but it can't be the move. And again, we'll see if the Ravens are even going to be competitive this season. I know it kind of feels like the season's over, but there is still a chance. There's still a crack. And so for Carl Lawson, he was probably one of the more accomplished players. But if I'm the Ravens, I'm still trying to do more. I'm not, necessarily trading away like everything you have, especially if you lose this game to Chicago. I think this game to Chicago, which we'll dive into, it kind of will tell us a lot about whether this season for the Ravens will continue on and they'll still try to compete, or will they just try to get the best draft pick they can or be sellers or whatever it may be. Whenever you have a Lamar, you have a chance. But if you're 1-6, that's a pretty tough conversation to be in. So if you look at the NFL free agents right now, at least across the board for who's actually available, this was updated yesterday here over at Sharp Football Analysis. In terms of edge guys, you got Lawson was on this list, but Yannick Ngakoue, Tyus Bowser, Jesse Luketa, who the Ravens also brought in for a workout, Jerry Hughes. So again, not a lot of great names there, but I think that you can add, like, I would love personally, and this maybe is a dream and not, necessarily reality, but I would love if the Ravens were to go out there, and I feel like Calais Campbell is a very realistic addition for this team. Now, does he want to leave Arizona to compete for one more season? I'm not sure, but that's a move where, look, the Ravens have 5 fifth-round picks. Throw a 5th-round pick or 2 at Arizona and say, hey, give us back Calais. And maybe throw a 5th-round pick or 2 at Tennessee and say, oh, Kevin Zeitler, come on down. This can be a move that can help, because right now, your outside linebacker room, your edge guys, essentially, Carl Lawson's added into that room, and it's also Tavius Robinson, and you also have Kyle Van Noy and Mike Green there. But the thing is, I don't think Carl Lawson's going to play in this game against the Bears, which, again, you're thinking, oh, the pass rush, they got the pass rush here. Well, he's on the practice squad, but it'd be a pretty short turnaround for him to go out there and play on Sunday. So I think the Ravens are going to probably use a lot of Trenton Simpson on the outside. That's probably their internal fix for this. Maybe they promote someone like Malik Ham or K'Mon Rucker from the practice squad. So those are all things that are on the table. But for Carl Lawson, again, how the practice squad works is at this point, you get 3 elevations, right? So, Jess Rebeck just put out from The Athletic. It'll be interesting to see if the Ravens use the open 53-man roster spot they just created, because they just waived Zaire Mitchell-Penn, because obviously Patrick Ricard, he's back now. So Zaire is kind of redundant. They don't need him on the roster right now. So you have a guy like Lawson on the practice squad. You don't have to cut anybody if maybe you do promote a Tyler Huntley. And, does that make sense for the Ravens to do, to keep 3 quarterbacks when Lamar is back and healthy? It's possible. They've used 2 of his 3 practice squad elevations on the year. So there is a chance that the Ravens don't have to move on from anybody in this scenario, and they can just promote someone, which, again, the Zaire Mitchell-Penn move was going to happen at some point. It was just a matter of when Patrick Ricard was coming back. But we're going to see how the rest of that unfolds. But again, I don't hate this signing. I think it's a fine signing. It's probably one of the better players still out there on the market at that position. But it's not, it's not elevating the Ravens into, the defense and the pass rush is fixed. We heard Zach Orr kind of talk about what he used the bye week for in terms of pass rush and, blitzes and whatnot. But for Lawson, the Ravens have needed, and hopefully Lawson can be this player for them, they've needed a guy that they can just line up and say, go win, and not have to blitz and get pressure only by blitzing. They've been in situations where, even when blitzing, they haven't been able to get a lot of pressure. And that's been the unfortunate part of it is, the Ravens and all of the things that they've done this season defensively and how poor it's been in a lot of different areas. I mean, it's been pretty tough, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're just letting the quarterback sit back there in the pocket over and over and over again without a lot of resistance and end up throwing the ball all over the field. So Lawson, to me, again, he's someone that is okay. If I had to give this a grade, I'd say it's probably a B, like maybe B plus. Like it's a move that is fine. It's not overly spectacular, but we knew the Ravens needed to do something. They needed to bring somebody in, and they decided to go with someone who does have experience. So coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk a little bit more about do the Ravens need to do more, which I've already kind of teased a little bit in the first part of the show. So be sure you stay tuned. We'll also continue talking about Carl Lawson and what he brings to the team, or what we hope he will bring to the team here in Baltimore. Stay tuned. Plenty coming your way on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Every day we make decisions, but on PrizePicks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss the excitement of this football season with PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. Playing PrizePicks is such a fun, simple way to add more excitement to football. You just pick more or less on player projections like Josh Allen's passing yards, Saquon Barkley rushing for a touchdown, and you're in the game. And I love how quick it is. You can make your lineup in under a minute. My favorite part, PrizePicks just added stacks. So if I want to ride with the player, I can select their pass yards, rush yards, and touchdowns all in one lineup. It's also fun to follow other players in the app and copy their lineups with one click. And the new injury reboot feature, if your player leaves early and doesn't return, it won't count against you. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. And the show is brought to you by Gametime. And look, NFL season is back. And honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle between queues, login screens, and prices. Jumping to checkout, it's frustrating. That's why I use Gametime, the app. It gives the advantage back to fans. Gametime is fast, easy, and backed by the Gametime guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. Now, I put up Gametime, and in just a couple taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite NFL games as low as $100. The app made it super simple. I can even see the exact view from my seat before buying, and I love zone deals, too. You pick the section, and Gametime picks the seats, and you save big. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way. I've bought tickets, so download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Moving along on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still instantly reacting with you here on this Thursday evening to the Ravens signing Carl Lawson to their practice squad. A pretty accomplished veteran, all things considered. Appreciate everybody for being here and spending some time with me on your Thursday evening. Of course, we had a episode this morning where we talked about Ben Johnson. He had some comments about John Harbaugh and Roquan Smith. Also, Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears. He joined us to talk about the Ravens and Bears matchup for Crossover Thursday. We'll have an episode tomorrow, obviously, in the morning, talking about more about Carl Lawson and the rest of this Ravens team. But we're here for you 5 days a week, plus more on Locked On Ravens. So Monday through Friday, we have the regular episodes. We also have the Locked On Ravens Squad show twice per week. We also do watch-alongs, instant reaction shows, bonus episodes, the whole 9 yards over here on Locked On Ravens. So let's keep talking about Carl Lawson a little bit, and then we'll dive into if the Ravens need to do more, which I think that answer for a lot of people is yes. And, I'll give you a little spoiler. I think the answer is yes. But Carl Lawson, I think, to me, provides you with, because Kyle Van Noy right now, he's the experienced guy in that edge room, in that pass rusher department. But, I think that you did need a little bit more of that because, David Ojabo at this point, you're kind of wondering, right? Where Tavius Robinson, he is on IR. Adafe Owe, he is gone. So David Ojabo wasn't really showing you anything. I'm not going to rely on David Ojabo to do much of anything here. Mike Green, again, the potential is there, but unfortunately, it hasn't been the start to the year that a lot of people were hoping for from Mike Green. And Kyle Van Noy, he missed some time. But here's the situation with the Ravens pass rush, all right? I just want to lay this out for you right here. Nnamdi Madubuike, he is the Ravens' current sack leader with 2 sacks. Also Tavius Robinson, right? Both those guys have 2. But Nnamdi Madubuike is the Ravens' sack leader. Nnamdi hasn't played since week 2. Right? It's been a while since we've seen Nnamdi Madubuike out on that football field. They have not been able to generate much of anything. Again, and with Zach Orr, some of the blitzing has been interesting. I mean, guys aren't getting off of blocks. And even when he sends some pressure, sometimes it's ill-opportune or at weird times. So, and I see the comments about Carl Lawson where it's like, I see, he's serviceable, he's a fine signing. I saw that as well. So it's just about being able to get somebody in. It's honestly almost like the CJ Gardner-Johnson conversation in a way, where you're going to have to be able to just find guys that can do something for you. It is something. And I talked about this on this morning's episode of the show where, the Ravens, and obviously I talked about it on the previous episode too, they have to try something different here. And, that's what the bye week is for. It's for experimenting, trying out different things. But they need to also, I think that includes the roster. Like they need to shuffle guys around, bring guys in, because if they're serious about, trying to compete here, get back on track, which all reports indicate. We had an episode on Monday about, a lot of people in New England are talking about, could the Ravens trade Derrick Henry to the Patriots? And Adam Schefter shut that down on Boston radio and was like, no, that's not happening. The Ravens, what he said was, according to people he talked to or whatnot, and understanding he's getting, the Ravens are legitimately gearing up for that second half run. And that is exactly what John Harbaugh is saying. It's exactly what the players are saying. That is the mood right now in Baltimore. And so, look, youth is a great thing, and guys on rookie contracts are a great thing. The Ravens have had to force a lot of their rookies into action, probably way sooner than they thought that they would. And a lot of that had to do with injuries. Some of it had to do with some poor play. It just kind of is what it is. But these are the types of moves you have to make. So we'll see, how Lawson fares over the next 3 games that he plays. Again, I'm not so sure he will play against the Bears, right? I think that's probably too close of a time to play from when you're signed on Thursday afternoon to when that game comes up on Sunday at 1 p.m. I mean, that's a tough turnaround. So they're going to have to rely on their internal options for this game. And, the Bears offense has been middling this season. I know they're on a 4-game win streak. We've talked about that on the show throughout the week, where I think that the Bears are a team, both teams are in situations right now where the Bears are trying to prove that their 4-game win streak is for real and that they're for real and it's not a fluke. And for the Ravens, they're just trying anything to get back on track and get a win on their 4-game losing streak. So I think that now, if the Ravens need to do more, the answer is yes. And we talked about it in the first part of the show. Is that a player like a Matt Judon or Jalen Phillips from Miami? Is that a Kayvon Thibodeau from the Giants? Do they maybe swing a little bigger with Jermaine Johnson from the Jets? That's someone that's intriguing. You could go and on the interior, like we talked about, trade for a Calais Campbell. I've seen people talk about Christian Wilkins, and I see Steven asking the question, why not try out Christian Wilkins? I don't know where his recovery is from his injury. Plus, I know the locker room stuff. Again, that situation is interesting and all the stuff that's come out about it. But, you can't deny the talent there from Christian Wilkins. I think it's just a matter of how healthy is he and, what's kind of the deal with the locker room stuff. So I think that if they were to sign him, he'd instantly become like, because Travis Jones, from a sack perspective, hasn't necessarily been there for them. He's also been a little banged up. I mean, John Jenkins has honestly been one of the Ravens' best defensive players. So there are a lot of things that the Ravens could do. Obviously, this is more defensive focused because we're talking about a defensive player in Carl Lawson. But I mean, I also think that on the offensive line, as we've talked about, I mentioned Zeitler, you have to make a couple of moves. And I think that for me, with where the Ravens draft pick is right now, honestly, in the first and second round, like if I were the Ravens, you would have to be 1,000% sure that if you're trading those picks away, it's for a guy like Max Crosby or Myles Garrett or like some big name player that will be in Baltimore for years after the fact. And that's worth giving up right now. I think is what the number 6th pick, the 6th pick in the draft the Ravens have right now, right around there. It's a top 10 pick for sure. I mean, that's very valuable to a team that is trying to compete with a quarterback on the Lamar Jackson is on and is going to get. So there's definitely an avenue where Baltimore gets super aggressive, but that avenue only comes if they're able to rattle off a couple of wins. You have the Bears and then the Dolphins, right? Those are 2 games. And look, if they lose to the Dolphins, there are just so many other big issues that I can't even describe the issues that the Ravens would have if they lose to the Dolphins. That team is just awful right now. I mean, look, the Bears are showing potential. They have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, but it's all going to depend on Lamar here, if he's going to play or not going to play. I know he's practiced the last 2 days, which is a great sign, but I've seen stuff on social media. Again, it's just people talking. It's nothing, substantive or anything like that. But are the Ravens ramping up Lamar Jackson to play against Miami and they're going to hold him out of Chicago? I don't know the answer to that question. It all depends, obviously, on how Lamar feels. Obviously the coaching staff has been very coy on the situation. The players have been very coy on the situation. So if Lamar's not out there, I mean, you're in a load of trouble. If Lamar does play, I think the Ravens do win this game against Chicago, and that's something I've talked about. But the big thing is being able to, because again, let's just talk about this game in particular. It's a whole season-long thing with the pass rush. Let's just talk about this game. If you want to pressure Caleb Williams, that's the way to win this game. Is speed up Caleb Williams and his internal clock, but they're going to have to probably do that without Carl Lawson. So I am hoping that we can see maybe a turn back the clock performance from Kyle Van Noy. The Mike Green can maybe get on the board here. Like, those are the two guys you're going to have to be relying on. But then you also have to kind of figure out, like, hey, on the interior, can you get a guy like a Travis Jones to step up? Or if Aeneas Peebles is active, can he come in on situational third downs and get a bit of pressure here? Force Caleb Williams outside the pocket, force him to make throws on the run, and just honestly get him into a couple of bad decisions, keep him behind the sticks. How you do that is, hey, a sack on first down sounds pretty nice to get it into, 2nd and 17 territory. Like, those are the plays the Ravens have been missing. And to add context into what Chicago has done versus what Baltimore has not done in this particular game in week 8, Chicago's forced 16 turnovers this season. It's the best mark in the league. They're the top in the league at turnover percentage as well. Baltimore is all the way down at number 30. All right, they're 30th in the league. They have 3 turnovers this season. And turnovers, obviously, they get the defense off the field, they get the opposing offense off the field, but they give you more opportunities, right? And for Carl Lawson, his stats from a forced fumble perspective, he has forced 4 over the course of his career. So, he had 2 in his last year in Cincinnati. He actually had 1 last year for Dallas. Like, when he's able to play and when he's up to speed and out there on the field, those are the types of things the Ravens have to prioritize. The problem is we heard them say that during the offseason, like, we're going to force those turnovers. Marlon talking about getting back to that 2000 standard. And the problem is, even when everybody was healthy, the defense, for the most part, still looked terrible. Roquan didn't look good. Marlon was having his struggles. And I get it. Injuries happened. That game against Houston, they had to play a bunch of rookies, but it's also guys like Malachi Starks not being able to kind of, go through some of his rookie growing pains quickly. He's been struggling with that. It's a lot of stuff. And I see in the comments people talking about guys that they could bring in or potentially should have brought in. I see Kobe talking about Quinnen Williams. I'd love Quinnen Williams. I mean, that's a guy that is a force. Actually, let me look up his stats real quick, because I'm how many sacks does he have this season? I know he's a beast in terms of what he's done over the course of his career. I mean, for him this year, only 1 sack on the year, but he's someone who had 12 back in 2022. He's been a Pro Bowler for 3 straight years. After his rookie season, so in 2019, he hasn't had a year below 5.5 sacks. He's getting paid a lot of money, and it'd probably take a lot to get him. If I were to pick a guy that they bring in, I would love Dexter Lawrence personally. I mean, just if we're talking about big interior first round pick guys that would probably, demand that over the course of this. Now, Lawrence doesn't have a sack this season in 7 games, but he had 9 last year. But I mean, look, I'm looking at a big edge guy. Like, that's the player that I would want the Ravens to go out there and get, right? I'm talking Max Crosby. Like, Crosby seems to be the guy, the next big pass rush domino to fall. I would go out there and I would get Max Crosby. I would, whether that move happens after the draft. Like, here's the perfect scenario, okay? The Ravens, I mean, there are multiple ways that we can do this, where they either compete, they win a Super Bowl, and then, their pick is like 32nd, hopefully, and then they trade that for Crosby along with other assets. Now, that's pretty unlikely right now based off how they've looked, but I'm just saying that's a potential option. The other option is that they don't compete at all this season. They tank, or I don't think they're going to tank, but they don't win a lot of games, and their pick is like top 10, top 15. Then you pick a player with that pick And then at some point after the draft, you trade your 2027 first and your 2028 first and whatnot for Crosby. And so you get that top 15 talent as well as also getting in a big pass rusher. But I think that, again, the Ravens have invested so much money in their secondary. And look, if you had told me, and I know this is stuff that happened a long time ago, but if you told me that the Ravens wouldn't re-sign both of Matt Judon and Zadarius Smith, I would have been like, what are you talking about? They're going to let one walk to re-sign the other. They invest heavily in certain areas. They don't invest in other areas. But I see it in the comments. I see people saying they're not getting Crosby. I wouldn't say that they are. I don't think if I had to predict, say, are the Ravens getting Crosby, I'd say no. I think it's not very likely. I agree. But that's like my dream scenario for the Ravens is they go out there and they get a guy like a Max Crosby. I see Steven talking about Kayvon Thibodeau would be a good option. Yeah, I mean, and again, I don't think he's going to cost you a ton, like maybe a third and a fourth and a fifth, like some of those. But the Ravens have 5 fifth-round picks this year. They do not need to draft 5 players in the 5th round in this draft, regardless of what happens this year or not. But Carl Lawson, they get him in the building. We will see what he ends up contributing because they just needed something, but they also should not be done making moves. Coming up in the final part of the show, we're going to dive a little bit more into the Ravens status right now, as well as if there are any questions, we'll get to those in the final part of the show as well. So if you have any, whether it's you're with us live or you're in the chat with us after the fact in video form or audio form, be sure to ask away. I'll try to get to as many as I can. Stay tuned. Plenty coming your way on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride with more IIHS top safety pick plus awards than anyone else's of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players who sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Continuing on, Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Thursday instant reaction edition of the show. Again, this usually is not an afternoon program. It's usually Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time, which we do every single weekday. But we had a lot of bonus episodes or instant reaction episodes recently because the Ravens have been making a lot of moves as they try to shuffle around their roster. So again, I appreciate everybody for being here today. And of course, be sure to check out what we have in store tomorrow with our regular Monday through Friday episode on Friday. And then we'll probably have some bonus episodes over the weekend as well. So you can tell a friend, tell a family member that we have them covered like we have you covered on Locked On Ravens. If they want some Daily Ravens coverage as well, as you can follow me over at social media at Chaos34. You got Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the whole 9 yards over there. All right, let's get into some, if this should change how the Ravens do things at the deadline. The answer is absolutely not. All right, it kind of goes hand in hand with what we talked about the Ravens need to do more. This should not change Baltimore's approach. And I still think that the approach should highly probably depend on this game against Chicago, but you also have other avenues that you can continue to improve your roster, where it's not just about these veteran signings of the practice squad. Because if we're being honest, like, yes, Eric DeCosta has hit on guys like this before. Kyle Van Noy is an example of that. Jadeveon Clowney is an example of that. But the reality is, for that 2023 season for the Ravens, that was a generational run that Eric DeCosta went on in terms of free agency. I mean, he hit on practically every single signing that he made. Even the Odell signing, which, was an overpay based off of the contract value, he still brought value in terms of off-field leadership, young player development. And even, he stepped up and made, 1 or 2 big plays for the Ravens every single game, it felt like, or at least for the majority of those games. So, this to me feels like it should be a turning point within the organization in terms of philosophy. I'm not saying they need to trade away every single pick that they have and only bring in vets and, scrap the whole youth idea. Because look, the reality is, when you have a quarterback on the contract Lamar is on and a lot of other $100 million contract players on your roster, you're going to have to rely on the draft and veteran signings a lot more than what they used to do, which is, if you remember, the Ravens loved to sign some of their solid players, right? Solid, but, not necessarily star players. Deals in like the 3-year, $20 million range, 4-year, $32 million range. They did that with guys like Nick Boyle. Patrick Ricard was one of those guys. Tavon Young was a player who got a deal like that. Tyus Bowser got a deal like that. So that's what they used to do. But those deals add up. And so when you're kind of allocating that money and sending it all to one player, a $100 million player, or Lamar Jackson in that big contract, you're not going to have as many quote unquote solid players on your roster. It's going to be a lot of top heavy guys. And then depending on how you draft will determine, well, what do those solid players look like on rookie contracts, guys in their first, second, third, or fourth years. But you can't overcommit to that, in my opinion, which I feel like the Ravens have done. If you listen to me at all last year during the draft process, I mean, the Ravens draft class, I actually might still even have the graphic here. I might have deleted it, but we're going to see. Actually, here it is right here. Look at this. See, so the Ravens full 2025 draft class, they picked 11 players in this draft, right? Some project guys, unfortunately, some injuries have happened, particularly to the cornerback position with the two guys that they drafted there. Emory Jones had his thing, but this is 11 guys. And I said forever, leading up to this draft and after they picked 11 guys, I said, if the Ravens have more than 10 draft picks, not all of them are going to make the roster. And lo and behold, what happened? Not all of them made the roster. And Garrett Dellinger is not even on the team and didn't even make it to the practice squad. So to me, it has to be a little bit of a shift in terms of, look, still draft guys and still value the draft. I'm not saying just throw that away, but it doesn't have to be like, you're getting 4 comp picks every single year. And, you're like, quote unquote, outsmarting the system every single year. Some guys, sometimes it's okay to go and sign a guy on the third day of free agency, or sign 3 guys on the third day of free agency, or on the second day of free agency, or even be players on the first day of free agency to get a guy in that will help your team, even if it costs you the opportunity at a 4th or 5th round pick. I just think that's the shift that they need to make. So that's where I am on that. I see Steven asking, do I feel like Emory Jones has a chance to play this week? I don't think so. I mean, he maybe has a chance to be active, but I don't think he's going to start for them. I mean, he still needs to work on his pass rush reps. We've heard the team talk about that, and obviously a lot of people surrounding the team talk about it, where he's just getting up to speed right now. So I wouldn't anticipate it. If he's active, I would probably say he doesn't really play, at least not having a big role. I feel like they'd give Corey Bullock an opportunity at the guard spot before they gave Emory Jones that opportunity, but that kind of is, in the situation of like, he needs to be able to get out there and play whenever he is active to be able to go out there and kind of get experience. But that's kind of the problem that the Ravens have had, right? It's they're relying on rookies to essentially not save their season, but give them key contributions when it's okay sometimes for rookies not to be ready. But at this point, I think we can all be in agreement, or at least a lot of us can be in agreement, that Daniel Falele does need to be the odd man out here. I know that Todd Monken hinted at some, or at least lack of, personnel changes, which I think got a lot of people not very happy about it. So I just, I don't necessarily know what the whole deal and situation is right there. So, I mean, we're going to see, we're going to see what ends up happening, but I don't really know at this point for the Ravens what else is next, right? Where for Baltimore, you can talk about pass rush, you can talk about edge, you can talk about the offensive line and defensive line. There's a lot to talk about. And I see Ravens rundown. We got Ravens rundown in the chat. Shout out Ravens rundown. Is there another move I'm missing out on? Again, right? And I think it's Joey who's behind that account right now. Joey's my guy because he understands my humor with the tweets I put out about the Ravens getting a dog and a guy, and I put a highlight of like their rookie season or from really long ago. Is there another move I missed? I don't know. Is there something that is breaking here that I'm missing? I'd love it. We could do a whole nother show if that's the case. I'm not seeing anything right now, but if there is something that happens, of course we'll go live here again. But those are some of my favorite things. This one had Ben Roethlisberger in there, and okay, I see no move I missed. Joe, I was actually trying to. Sometimes I'll tweet out because the one that got me, I think the one that started that for me was Melvin Gordon, I'm pretty sure, and I tweeted his Wisconsin highlights, and then I did it with Dalvin Cook and Florida State. Sometimes I try to find college highlights if I can't find a good NFL highlight. But what I'll try to do is try to find like the oldest, because with Oh, who was it? It was Bo Braid. I tweeted Bo Braid's high school highlights when they signed him as an undrafted guy. Everyone's like, "You're tweeting out high school highlights." I'm like, "It's the bit, everybody. It's the bit." So that's some of the things that I love it. So shout out Joey and shout out to Ravens Rundown over there. Be sure to go check him out. But I'll tell you what, the Ravens, they should not be done making moves. And if anything else happens, we will be here on Locked On Ravens talking about it as well. So that's all I have for you here today on this episode of Locked On Ravens. Thanks so much for tuning in to the show. On the way out, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button in video form and audio form, and follow along here what we got on Locked On Ravens for 5 days a week, plus more of the Ravens coverage. Of course, coming up, we'll have our regular episode tomorrow, 6 a.m. Eastern time, talking more Carl Lawson, more Ravens news and notes. And of course, we'll get everything you need here for Baltimore Ravens football. So be sure to stay tuned. Appreciate everybody, and I will see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.